Hey guys, today we're going to do a very specialized video on SSIS scripting. So what we're going to do is we are going to take the output from a script task and we are going to put it into a variable so we can use it later on in the script. Now, this isn't as easy as it sounds up front, which is why I'm making this video. And the way that we're going to do this is we're going to get a list of AWS S3 files, and we're going to put them in the package variable, and then we are going to copy those locally with another script file. So let's go ahead and get started. We start by opening up the script task. So I've got my S3 bucket project parameter here. I'll show you the format of that in a minute. And the read-write variable, because we're going to write to this variable, it needs to be in read-write. And that's going to be our S3 file list variable here. So the output from the OS command is going to feed this variable, and then we're going to turn around and use it later. So let's go ahead and edit the script. There we go. Now, for starters, let's go ahead and start with the S3 bucket. Now, I'm not going to show you my S3 bucket, but in this variable, you can see here, so I'm going to, inside the variable, the format is like this. It is S3 colon whack whack, like that. So for this example, you want to format it just like this. You can format yours any way you want to. I mean, not anyway, because the call has to look like this. But you can hard code it. Don't hard code it. Or you could break up the parameters any way you like. So you could have like S3 bucket. You could have this here, and then you could have my bucket on its own. You can break that up any way you want to. And like I said, you could also hard code it. Don't hard code it. Okay, with that said, now we've got our command parameters. And I'm going to explain this kind of in a different order. So I'm going to skip explaining this line for now, and I'm going to hop down to something else. So what we're doing is we're running an OS command, and that OS command is going to be AWS. If you've ever had to code anything against S3 before, then you're probably pretty adept at using AWS. So I create my file list here, and it's just a new list type. Then I'm going to start up a class, an instance of a class of process start info. I'm going to call that PSI. And I'm going to pass it in the name of that exe. So aws.exe. It should already be in your Windows path. If it's not, you'll be better off to add it. But if you don't want to do that, then you can put the full path to it in here. Now is where we come into the command params. So the aws.exe is clearly the program you're going to call, but then we have to call that with some parameters. And in here, we're going to call S3. So here's the command parameters. We're going to pass it in S3, an ls, which means list. And then now is when we start to build the path, right? So I've got DTS variables S3 bucket, which is then on top of that going to go to job view logs, AWS staging, EMR output, to do. And as a database guy, this syntax really bothers me right here. That just tells it to be recursive. But for us, that looks like it's commented out. So that just really bothers me. Anyway. Now, I've got this hard-coded in here because I was troubleshooting something, but I do have a parameter for that, and I'm going to switch it back when I'm done. But yeah, so don't do like I did here. Put this in another variable that looks a lot like this one, or maybe just a package variable if you don't want to pass it in through the project, but don't hard-code it. Okay, so to explain one more time, and I know it seems like I'm over explaining this, but I really want you to fully understand what's going on here. So I'm creating a list, and this is just an object. I'm creating a new instance of process start info, and I'm passing that the exe that I want to run, the program that I want to run. And then I'm passing that any of the parameters that I need to pass it to do what I need to do, right? So redirect standard output equals true. We're going to talk about that more in a minute. For right now, let's just move on and get our list. I'm going to explain every one of these. Okay, so now I'm going to use shell execute. I'm going to set that to false. I'll explain that again in a minute too. In fact, let me comment out all this stuff here and get down to just the bare essentials. There, 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 there. And I might need to put this one back. I'm not sure, but let's find out. So now I'm going to set a new variable, get file list, to system diagnostics process. And I'm going to take get file list and I'm going to start it. So I'm going to take the start method under the diagnostics process class, or I'll just call it the process class. And I'm going to pass it. What am I going to start? I'm going to start this variable that calls this exe with these parameters. Easy enough, right? So create a list, create a variable that holds the exe and the parameters to pass it. I'm going to start up an instance of a stream reader and call it my output. And then I'm going to say, let that equal to the process that I just started, dot standard output. So I'm going to take the standard output from this guy and I'm going to assign it to this guy. So whatever this gives me is now going to be in here. And as a matter of fact, I am going to need to uncomment that. And I'm going to need to uncomment this one as well, because now it's time to talk about that. So here it says redirect standard output equals true. This is a little bit misleading in that it looks like you're trying to redirect the standard output. And in a way you are, but what it really should say is redirect to standard output, because the default output for this process is going to be the console. But I don't want to output it to a console. I want to output it somewhere where I could get some use out of it, right? The console is how we see the results. Standard output is how the computer and variables and whatnot see the results. So redirect to standard output, not just redirect standard output. So I'm going to redirect this to the standard output, and then I'm going to read the standard output and put it into this variable. Fair enough. I'm going to set up a variable named file as a string. Then I'm going to say file equals output.readline, as long as readline is not null. So as long as there are rows coming back from readline, I'm going to put that current line into this file, and then I'm going to do something with it inside of here. And what am I going to do with it inside of here? I'm going to take that file list, the one we created up here, just that list object, and I'm going to call the add method, and I'm just going to add an item to it, right? So I'm going to say take the file, and I want to take the substring of that same file, and that file is just that line, right? That current line. And I'm going to take index of job view logs. So what this is really saying, let's come back up here. And you see this whole thing starts with the S3 bucket, and job view logs, so on and so on, right? So after the bucket name, the next folder is job view logs and so on, right? So what this line is telling you to do is index of, is it's saying take the index of where this begins, where job view logs begins, and take everything from there on. So what I'm really doing is cutting off the bucket name and taking just the path from underneath the bucket, right? So this is kind of a weird way to say it, but that's what's happening. So I'm taking everything from job view logs on and leaving the bucket behind, because since I'm going to copy it locally, I don't really care about the bucket anymore. I've already got the file list. What I do care about is the folder structure that these guys are in. Okay, and so it's going to go through the first line. It's going to assign it. It's going to assign that first line, which is going to be a full path to a file name, and it's going to assign it to this guy, and it's going to add it to the file list, and it's going to cut off the bucket right there. It's going to go to the second one, do the same thing, third one, same thing, fourth one, so on and so on. So while the read line doesn't equal null, I'm going to be adding items to this bucket. I mean to this list. Okay, so now comes the easy part. I'm just going to call dts.variables user AWS file list, and I'm going to set the value equal to this list that I just created. I'm done filling it, so I'm going to go outside the loop, and I'm going to set it equal to the package the package variable that I've got. Now, I know that one of the first things you're going to ask is, why can't I just take this dot value and set it inside of here and do something like this? And then I'll just say something like this, and then set that equal to the file string. I think that's all I need right there. And set that equal to that. So why can't I just do that? And I'll get rid of this just to keep from the confusion. There we go. Well, the reason you can't do it like this is because for some reason it gives you an improperly formatted object variable. I tried this a few times, and I tried it a few different ways, and every single time I did it, the for each loop that comes next in the package couldn't read this variable properly, and it kept giving me an error. But when I add it to the file list and then assign it all at the same time, it works just fine. So let's go ahead and stick with that, shall we? So I'm going to go ahead and get rid of this. And I'm going to put this back. There we go. I'm going to save it. All right, so I've explained this ad nauseum for some of you, and now it's time to run it. So what should we get? Well, we shouldn't really get anything yet because, like I said, we're just filling this variable right here, right? But what we are looking for it to do is pass. So let me double check that I saved that. Let me close this out. Close this out. And now let's run our S3 file list. I'll execute task. Notice how I'm not getting anything in the window, and it passed. Now, I didn't get anything in the window because, again, I redirected to standard output instead of to the console. So redirect standard output really should be redirect to standard output. I'm going to also uncomment this because I'm redirecting to standard error. Now, one thing that we don't like to see when we do stuff like this is we don't like to see the window popping up. So let's go ahead and take care of that. So I'm going to set this PSI has a window style equals process window style hidden, right? It's also got, minimize and maximize and I think normal or something like that. Maybe it says default. But I'm going to go with hidden in this case because I don't want the window to come up at all, right? I mean, this is an automated process. I shouldn't have to see the window. And you're going to see that a lot when we go to download these files. So let's go ahead and copy that. Okay, let's close this down. I shouldn't have copied it. I should have saved it. Hopefully it saved. And let's see what happens. I'm going to execute task. And I still have my window. Huh. Let's take a look at that. That's you, dude. There we go. Let's open this back up. There we go. So, I have this set to hidden. Why doesn't it work? Well, if you go to MSDN or Microsoft site, right, it tells you that in order to use hidden, use shall execute has to be equal to true. But it also tells you to redirect the output, use shall execute must be false. So I've got conflicting settings here. I want to hide my window, so I set this to true, but I also want to redirect to standard output, which means this has to be false. Well, which one's more important to you right now? Clearly redirecting the output, right? You definitely want to redirect to standard output. So I'm going to have to make this false. But what about my hidden window? Well, let's comment this out. And let's go with create no window instead. So PSI, the process start info, has another property called create no window, and let's set that to true. And let's see what happens. I saved that. Let's close out. Let's close out. And let's call this again. Execute task. Look at that. It succeeded. And we didn't get a window. Beautiful. So let's close this. But the question is, did we really get anything in that variable? Well, for that, we're going to have to go down here to copy file, because if I double click on here, and this is a for each loop container, for my collection, I'm using a for each from variable enumerator, not the ADO enumerator, and I'm setting it to that variable that I just filled in the other script task. And I've got a variable mapping in here, which is just a string, to current AWS S3 file. So what's going to happen, of course, is it's the previous task up here, get file list, is going to fill this variable, and then for each line in that variable, I'm going to set it to the current S3 file variable so that I can work with that inside the loop. Perfect. Now, let's take a look at this guy. And again, I've got my read-only variables in here. So, a lot of this is going to look the same. I've got my command params. I've got my PSI calling AWS and the command params. Only now, what am I doing? I'm copying it. So instead of S3 list, I'm calling CP for copy. And what am I going to copy? I'm going to copy my bucket and the current user variable, right? So that string in there is everything but the bucket name. So I'm adding the bucket name back to the string and saying I want to copy that exact file to my file processing path, to the same name, right? And remember, this name right here is the full path to the variable minus the bucket. So let's say that this equals d colon, right? So it'll be d colon backslash, what was that? Job view logs, to do, so on and so on and so on, right? So it's going to be that whole path right there. And to keep it easy, to keep it simple, I'm just going to recreate the path locally. So it just so happens that this is going to be under processing, job view logs. And right now you can see that's empty. And it's going to stay empty until I do something with it. So for right now, let's just make sure that we're getting these guys. So I'm going to uncomment this, and I'm going to comment out the start line. So see here, I'm going to start it, calling the start method. I'm going to comment that out. So I don't want to start it just yet, but I do want to make sure that everything looks okay. So I just want to make sure that I'm getting that file. So I'm going to print the current file through a message box. And let's just make sure that we're getting that. So let's close out of this. Oh yeah, that's that thing. Okay. And now, since this relies on this, now I have to run the entire package. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to start. Going through there, going through there. Okay, good. This is the file name right here. Job view logs, AWS staging, output, to do, so on and so on. We've got this nice dated path in here, right? And when I go to the next one, see 00001, 002, 03, 04. So we're definitely cycling through the files. Beautiful. Let's stop this. And let's go back down here to copy file. Let's go back in here. Any day now. There we go. So now let's comment this back out, because we certainly don't want to get a message for every single file, because there are dozens and dozens of files in here. And let's take this guy off. And let's put the Windows hidden back to true. Let's start the process this time. And I want to show you what happens when I set this, when I start this and I don't hide the windows. This is going to be a mess. Okay, let's close this. And let's OK that. And now let's run this guy again. Look at that. Isn't that a mess? And of course, since we're redirecting the output like we did last time, then all of these windows are blank, and they'll all close down. But what if you were trying to work on the server while something like this was going on? This is a disaster, right? This is just a mess. So I'm going to pause this until it finishes, and I'll be right back. There we go. It finished. It took about 30 seconds, I guess. So everything finished successfully, and you can see that the program, that the AWS program also creates the folders for me. I love that. And if we keep going through here, we're going to find files. Beautiful. We've got our files. Let me go back to here. So let me go ahead and stop this. But of course, the problem now is still that we've got those windows coming up, right? So let's go ahead and solve that one last little problem. And here it is. Let's comment that out. Let's create no window equals true. There we go. And I think that'll do it. So let's go ahead. I saved it. So let's go ahead and close this. Oops, that's wrong. Do that. Do that. Now, one last thing. You'll notice here that I'm getting the files at the same time that I'm deleting the files, the last files from this directory. It doesn't have to be one or the other here. This entire sequence container is going to run before this one gets called. So I can do these two in parallel quite easily. So this time when we run this, we're going to watch this guy. In fact, yeah, that'll be fine. So we're going to watch this guy, and we're going to see if anything disappears before it runs. So I'm going to do that. Come here, and we're going to watch both of them, actually. And so job view logs did go away and come back, or yeah. And you see how we're still copying files here, and we're flashing through the files here. They're very, very tiny, so this is going really fast. And I'm going to pause and come back when it's done. And we're done. And you can see we still have files again. One more time. Jeez, man. There we go. Only one under per site, but we still have all these in per job. So everything's looking good. Now I can take these guys and do anything with them I want. What I'm going to do next is import them into a table. And this isn't the only way you could do this. You could pull all of these. You could pull all these files in at once, and you don't have to make multiple calls by using a different command in AWS. But for now, this is a really good start. And again, this doesn't have to be AWS. You can do this with any external command that you need to call. So, depending on how that call returns its results, you may end up like getting a blob and like doing a bunch of regex on it. But it's still possible to do this, to gather all of this and put it in a variable, and then you can do anything you need to with it. So I hope you guys find this helpful, and good luck.